Hi Rachel. As you know, I'm Debbie I'm the CEO of Resolute Women's Support Services in Barnsley at the moment, but we're hoping for that to get nationwide eventually. Um, so yeah,
Taking over the world.
well, I don't know about that, but we keep going. We keep going. It's frustrating and hard work, but we see the vision. We know what needs to be done. It's just getting the right people to listen um, to that. And the idea of the podcast is to hopefully get that reality out there of what is actually going on, because I'm getting quite fed up of seeing posts and hearing, you know, professionals and government saying that they want to do this and this is going to happen, but in reality, it's getting worse. And I'm hoping that this shift in government's going to change quite a bit, hopefully. Fingers crossed. So, do you want to introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah, okay. My name is Rachel-Horman-Brown. I'm a solicitor specialising in cases of domestic abuse, stalking, and coercive control. I head up a department of about 30 lawyers, and we all kind of specialise in this area of work. And deal with cases really across England and Wales. Our main offices are based in the northwest, but like I say, we deal with cases from all over. I'm also the chair of Paladin, which is the National Stalking Advocacy Service. It's been around for about 11 years now, and we deal with high risk victims of stalking, and we advocate on their behalf with the police and the CPS, and put in bespoke safety planning for them. We are totally swamped really, so we can only deal with high risk victims, and unfortunately at the moment we even then have too many referrals for us to cope with. Obviously funding is an issue and we're always trying to recruit staff. We also train people to become what we call ISACs, independent stalking advocacy caseworkers. And the idea behind that, I do one of the modules on that course. And the idea really is to get these stalking experts into organisations across England and Wales, because we can only do so much. And I think it's really important that we have ISACs in every organisation, every domestic abuse organisation. And, you know, they need the expertise because it is different from domestic abuse. And I think it's something that's really dealt with badly by the police and other organisations, and sometimes the advice that's given to victims actually puts them at more risk, which obviously it isn't a good thing. So we do spend a lot of time training people up, and we have this qualification. So that's a really important thing that we do. I've also written a book which I'm in the process of updating on coercive control in the family courts, because I do think, you know, a lot of people now don't qualify for legal aid and are representing themselves, and you know, it's such a difficult place to be unsupported and unrepresented is the family courts. You know, some people call it the Wild West, and that very much depends. Some people do have good experiences in it. You can get really good judges, really good CAFCAS officers, and then other people have a really horrendous experience and find it really difficult sometimes to make the judge or the CAFCAS officer understand what coercive control in particular is. I think the family courts are quite good with physical violence, and if you walk in with a black eye they will say that's wrong and they see that is domestic abuse. But if you go in and tell them about lots of smaller incidents which in isolation might seem insignificant, then I think they really struggle to deal with that. And because they are underfunded and they struggle dedicating enough time, it's very easy in a statement to describe physical abuse, because you can describe a black eye, a broken leg, he pulled my hair out in one page, and you can immediately see, whoa. Whereas coercive control takes much longer to describe the context of it and what happened and how it made you feel, etc. And I think sometimes the courts don't want to hear that because they haven't got time to deal with it. So I wrote the book to try and help people, professionals as well, but I tried to make it fairly jargon free, and really so that people who were unrepresented could use it to help them. And I've had some really good feedback about that, with women saying that it's really helped them. It's not a magic wand, obviously, but it has helped them understand the system a little bit and understand the things that they need to be asking for within the system. So I'm just trying to find the time at the moment to update that, because there have been quite a few changes over the last few years. Sorry, I feel like that's been a really long introduction.
No, it's fine, honestly. I'm really interested to hear what it is that you do, and I get to know you a bit better, really, because this is the first time we've actually spoken to it. So what changes do you think that needs to be happening within the system?
I think there's been a lot of changes, a lot of new laws, different pilot schemes, etc. And I wouldn't get rid of any of those. Change is good, but what we need is real change, not just new laws that say, we're taking domestic abuse seriously, we're making this now a separate criminal offence, etc. Whilst that's positive, the real problem for me is that the police are not using the existing laws that we have. So that's not an argument to say, we shouldn't have any new ones. Of course we should. But I do think we need to really tackle the basics of this. And it doesn't matter how many new laws you have, if the police are just not taking domestic abuse seriously and are still fobbing women off when they ring up and report it. And to me, that is people say, what one thing would you change? Well, that would be it. And I would have, these officers need to be sacked. They need to lose their jobs over the way that they are dealing with domestic abuse. They're putting women at risk, and women are losing their lives because of negligence, really, from the police. If my staff did what they were doing, they wouldn't last 2 minutes because we would move them on.
Exactly.
And I just think there aren't many sectors where you would get away with performing so badly on a daily basis. And how many times, I'm sure you feel the same about this, when we have a domestic abuse homicide, we hear the same old shit coming out from the police saying lessons will be learned, we're really sorry about what happened. And you just hear that again and again and again, and nothing ever changes.
And I don't think it's what the victim's family really wants to hear, is it? We are learning from this, we are making changes. They're not, because it's getting worse from what we see on the ground. From what we see, it is getting worse. And ultimately, if the police aren't doing their job at first point of call, then what hope does a victim have? Because as a professional in an organisation, if you're signposted to police to report things and then they're not doing their jobs, then where the hell are they meant to go after that? And I do believe that a lot of the cases, if jobs were done properly in the first place, quite a large majority of these cases wouldn't even end up in the court arena. And the victims wouldn't be having to left to prove certain things, because it'd be in a police report to start with that a judge can see.
I agree. I've always said that really my department shouldn't need to exist, and ideally in the future it shouldn't exist. And actually we are turning work away because there's so much of it, so many people that need help, and really we're just mopping up the mess that the police should have dealt with in the first place. And that's not just in terms of getting non-molestation orders and protective orders for victims, which the police should be doing. It's not just that. Like you say, the family courts, if we had proper convictions and documented evidence on the police file, the job of the family court would be, it would be over in a few weeks rather than it being years like it is now. And the family court having to have trials which really should have taken place in the criminal courts. And solicitors and family court judges are not investigators. We do our best, but we've not been trained in gathering evidence in the way that the police have, and we don't have the powers to obtain that evidence. So we're never going to do as good a job as the police should do, and they can do a good job. When something is deemed to be serious, like a murder, suddenly then they can find the evidence and they can do everything, and that's without a victim to tell them anything. So they can do it, but they choose not to in terms of domestic abuse and stalking too many times. And I just think it's a real false economy. If you just, if you forget the human cost, if you just think about money, domestic abuse costs £77 billion every year. So if you just spent a little bit more on the investigation
and resources, there's so much that can be prevented. I set a petition up a couple of years ago about a tag and app system, and that would look like that if there's unreasonable doubt that a perpetrator has committed the crimes that a victim is disclosing, then the perpetrator is tagged and the victim have an app on their mobile phone which would alert her to get somewhere safe, and at the very same time it would alert the police to say that he has breached that order. That in turn would then save the victim having to prove that this order's been breached. The police wouldn't have to investigate because the evidence is there. Lock them up. End of. Lock them up. None of this tap on hand because you've breached your non-mol, that we can't prove that you've really breached. How much resource is being wasted on putting these orders in place that are not even being acted on? They're not putting domestic violence protection orders in place, and which should be in place before it gets to an emergency hearing for the non-mol to be put there. Waste of time and money. Absolute waste and time of money. All that resources could be put in one place, one tag, one app. That's it. And lock them up.
I do think that that would be really useful in terms of using technology with protective orders. I do think that legally there would need to be some kind of order in place, a civil order, so you wouldn't need to have the same standard of proof as a criminal court, which is obviously much higher. And really I don't see why they aren't used with non-molestation orders, with restraining orders, with any kind of protective orders. We've got stalking protection orders, domestic violence protection orders, and they all rely on the victim reporting the breaches, gathering evidence. Really, the police will often say, well, where's your evidence, as though it's the victim's job to find that. And there was a case recently where somebody was sent to prison for breaching a restraining order, and I think he'd gone to the door of the victim, and the police had given her this smart water spray, and she'd sprayed him. It's invisible. It is just water, but it does have something in it which is identifiable specifically to that victim, and they were able to use that to identify that he must have got nearer to enable her to do that, and obviously he was convicted. But that sounds great, but really, do you want to get close enough to the perpetrator to be able to do that? Well, no, you don't.
Exactly. And do you know how hard it is? Do you know how hard it is to actually get smart water issued? You're talking months. It has to go through clearance. It has to be delivered to the victim's door. And like you said, should you really be in that much danger where you're in enough proximity to that perpetrator to be spraying water on him? And then what happens when that perp then runs off or goes somewhere else and it's waiting time then to try and catch him? It it's just no. They need tagging.
Somebody said to me on Twitter, actually, while I was issued with this, and I was told I wasn't allowed to use it unless I shouted a warning first. Well, obviously it's going to run off. And she said that if I was told if I sprayed it near his face, I could be arrested for assault.
Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
But if they had the digital tagging, like you say, then somebody could be arrested much further away. We shouldn't be having a situation where you have to wait until somebody's a foot away from you because you could be dead. So I do think use of larger exclusion zones, and obviously that does rely on the police doing something about it when they are notified that there's been a breach. But evidentially, I do think that's a great way of reducing court time and proving what's happened, and it'd be very easy to do, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's a simple and when I've delivered training to ambulance crews and things like that, they're all like, well, why isn't that in place? It just makes common sense. They wouldn't need to be investigating anything because it's there. The evidence is there. I'm going to put myself out there now, and I'll be speaking probably on what a lot of people actually do think but daren't say. And I want to say I would personally go, this is my view, I would go one step further and I would microchip the lot of them where there's unreasonable doubt, unreasonable doubt that they have committed these serious, severe, disgraceful crimes. I would microchip the lot of them like they do dogs. And I'm sure I'm going to get a load of human rights brigade at me for whatever reasons, but let's get to nitty-gritty of this now. Everything is back to front. The odds are stacked against victims. It is so wrong. It needs to do a full 360. Victims should not be in a position where they are having to do their own investigations. They're having to be re-triggered. They're having to be traumatised by having to go into police stations that some have never even stepped a foot in. Then they're faced with post-separation abuse in family court arenas. All this could be stopped. Simple procedures in place, it could be stopped. The reducing of homicides would go down drastically because they wouldn't. You are not telling me when you see a homicide on TV that a woman and her children have been killed in their own home, right, or anywhere for that matter, that there has not been warnings to the police before that has happened, but we don't hear about that.
I think in the majority of cases there absolutely have been. This is the thing. It's at Paladin we call it murder in slow motion because you can see it happening, and there are lots of opportunities generally for the police to prevent it and to stop it occurring. And time again those chances are missed. So I agree that we do need to do something quite radical. If we want to change this, we can't carry on doing the same thing because it's not working.
No, it's not working.
So we do need to actually, I think, be brave. And, I do think, to use a microchip on somebody who'd never been convicted or there were no orders against them, you are going to get people complaining about that, rightly or wrongly. But I think it's much easier to argue in cases where somebody has been convicted, then you've proved beyond reasonable doubt that they are a danger. There's no argument about that. So surely, the human rights argument should be fairly weak in that situation when you're comparing the risk of homicide to what's the inconvenience to him of having, that.
Exactly.
So I do agree that we need to be brave and to do things that we've never thought, we've never discussed before even, and to really change things. And if Labour have said they want to halve the number of domestic homicides, well, in order to do that, you're going to have to do something
drastic, very drastic. It has to be, because I think that I just think that they've got to do something as drastic as that. They can't keep releasing these prisoners because we've got no rooms. Well, you're just letting them out to do it again, basically. I don't believe for 1 minute, or there's a very, very, very small percentage that can be rehabilitated. When the cases are so extreme, they've not. This goes beyond. And I also think it's the amount of women committing suicide that we don't talk about enough. It's those. It cuts me deeply. It really, really does. It cuts me deeply because we're never going to know about them. We're never going to hear their voices. And me, alongside many, many women, have been in that position and situation where they've not wanted to be here anymore. And they're the ones that have never been documented and recorded. But 9 out of 10 women that come to us have had suicidal thoughts or attempted, because they just don't know what to do anymore. They are at the lowest point of their lives that they've ever been in.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. I think that is an area that's starting to be looked at a little bit more. And people are now starting to collate some statistics in relation to how prevalent that is. And there have been a couple, I think, of prosecutions where, it's quite clear that somebody has been, encouraged to do it even by the perpetrator. But, they are the tip of the iceberg in terms of how many there actually are. So again, I think we need to see a big change in that, and more prosecutions where, it's where you're able to show that link in the behaviour. And obviously if you keep pushing somebody and breaking them down psychologically, they will break at the end, won't they? And that is often the consequence for women. And somebody, the perpetrator needs to be brought to account for that. Absolutely.
It's very difficult though when they come across like the charming man that they are, you know what I mean, outside of those walls. It's difficult to even try and speak out about what's actually happening inside the home. And this is what we need to realise. It would, victims don't all walk about with black eyes, and it's that societal view on it that we need to change into. It's unacceptable, end of, and they need to have a zero tolerance to it. It needs, none of this. I just think it's tougher consequences, tougher sentences. What messages that have been set out now to perpetrators by releasing them early? That's not sending a clear-cut message out, is it? Only that they're free to go and do it again, basically. There is no consequence.
Absolutely. And, that I've got clients who are being threatened by the perpetrator from prison. They're sending letters out, they get hold of mobile phones in prison quite easily, and they're ringing them, from prison and making these threats. As soon as I get out, I'm going to kill you. And nothing happens about that. don't be surprised when, that threat comes true.
Yeah, I I've wrote a few times to Home Office in past, like with previous government about this tagging app, and this was nearly 2 years ago now. I got a response saying that they um, look at it as seriously as terrorism, domestic abuse. And the reason I always use the term domestic abuse rather than domestic violence is because for me, the abuse, the rape, everything falls under domestic abuse when it comes to coercive control, the violence, the emotional torture, everything ultimately comes under domestic abuse. And I want to say, in my opinion, these not are official stats, but these are what we see on the ground. That they're saying that it's classed the same as terrorism, and even the violence against women and girls. Ultimately, I want to say, like our stats, would say that at least 90% is usually domestic. So instead of just focusing on the Vogue, they need to put it all under one umbrella, I think.
Yeah, but I also think we need to kind of violence against women and girls. The perpetrator is invisible in that phrase, isn't it? And we all know the perpetrator is male. And I do think it's important that we also make that clear. And yes, there can be female perpetrators, of course, just like there can, be male victims, but the vast majority of what we're talking about, and in particular the homicides, we're looking at male violence against women and girls. And I do think people shy away from saying that because they don't want to upset anybody, or not all men and all of that. But again, we need to be brave about this. And yes, there are cases that don't fit into that, but the vast majority of what we are dealing with day in, day out is male violence against women. And until we accept that and start to, just speak about that normally, then again, nothing's going to change. And we're almost promoting a fiction that anyone is as likely to commit domestic abuse. Men and women are both equally likely to kill their partners, and that's just not true.
Yeah. So what's your views in real change? Do you agree with like the police need to up the game massively, and that the cases would start falling for court then?
Yeah, I think there's lots of things that we need to do. I think there's not just one change that we can make that will cure this. We need to start working with children in schools to start
Yeah.
with. In terms of changing views, we've got all of this horrendous misogyny on the internet that young boys are seeing, and girls are seeing as well. And girls think that it's normal to be treated in this way. We hear music that tells them that,
Yeah.
refers to them as whores and different things. We need to look at all of those little things like that. Andrew Tate is somebody who's often quoted as being, the person that is causing all of this misogyny. I don't, he's horrendous and he needs to be in prison, in my view. But misogyny has been around for hundreds of years. Andrew Tate did not invent that. And I think Andrew Tate is saying things publicly which too many men actually think. So, he's the face of it, if you like. And yes, we can use that as a tool to try and say to young boys and girls, this is wrong, and this is why this is wrong, and we can use it to start the conversation. But that's something to be going on in the background. But at the sharp end of it, we do need that police response to be better. And if they can't be better, they should not be police officers, and they certainly should not be receiving pensions, etc., from their employment.
Yeah.
They need to go, and we need new police officers. I do think we need more funding within the police, and we need to think about what is it we want our police officers to do. Do we want, should it only be police officers, for example, that are allowed to stop somebody for speeding? You can only be prosecuted when a police officer, shoots the speed gun at you. Do we really want police officers spending the time doing that? Or can we delegate that to the traffic officers that are on the motorway all of the time? They're not allowed to do that. So, what do we want them to do? And I think we need to have that conversation and really focus them. But if we are serious, and I've heard them say we're going to treat this like terrorism for a while, nothing has changed. So, they can say that as much as they like, but until they start doing something different, and until there are consequences for the police that fail, nothing will change. And every single day I speak to a woman who's had a terrible experience from the police when she's reported it. It's not just the police, it's also the CPS, and I think the CPS are often the invisible ones in this situation that nobody really thinks about. But some of the advice that they give to the police, and some of the, they will say, oh no, not enough evidence there to bring charges, this is not in the public interest. I've helped a number of victims do what they call victim right to review applications. So that's when the CPS are passed the evidence from the police, and then they make a decision about what charges, if any, are appropriate. And very often they'll say no charges at all. And even the police find that frustrating when they've spent time building the case. And when a victim is notified about that, they're supposed to get a letter to tell them, the CPS have made this decision. This is very briefly why, never any detail. And you are able to appeal this decision. They very rarely get that letter. But I've helped victims utilise that scheme. And I've had a case where it went from 0 charges to 10 charges after the appeal. So suddenly, when somebody else higher up the ladder looked at it again, taking into account the representations I made, suddenly there was enough evidence for 10 charges. So, that's wrong. And the person that made that decision in that case should have faced some real consequences, in my view. But they get to go through their career not really caring about what happens. Too often you speak to CPS lawyers who are just reading the case on the morning at court for the first time. Do they care what happens? Not really.
No.
That's not a good system. And I think, many victims who, like you say, have never been into a police station before, certainly never been into a courtroom before, they're really surprised to find out that they're not allowed to have a lawyer. So within that system, they've got no direct voice. And very often, what they're saying isn't passed on to the CPS. The CPS does not pass that on to the magistrates or the judge or whatever. And I do think we need to look at a way of enabling victims to have some kind of representation within proceedings, because too often things are said by the defence which are not correct. They're lies. And the CPS don't know their lies and don't really care to check very often. And the victim is so frustrated because they are effectively gagged, not allowed to say anything. And I've had a case where a victim was very frustrated about what was happening with the case. She didn't feel that the evidence she was supplying to the police was necessarily being passed to the CPS. So she turned up at one of the early hearings at the magistrates' court with the intention of being able to actually speak to the CPS lawyer face to face. And she was really criticised in court for doing that by the defence lawyer. Look at this, it's unheard of for a victim to be turning up. She's the one that's obsessed. and it was all turned around on her. And I think as a victim, very often you manage to get away from the perpetrator, and then you're going to spend the next 12 months of your life fighting the criminal justice system, basically. So it's, it's
12 months
almost like
plus.
they abuse you as much as the perpetrator does, and that's why victims give up.
Yeah, so 1,000% agree. And that's why the statistics are not a true reflection, because they are ground down to the point where they do give up. They cannot take any more physically and mentally. And then the mental health's turned on them, turned against them. They ain't got capacity. I I would challenge anybody that says that it's possible to face this system that's in place and the abuse that they've already endured, and by the time they get to the court arena, for it have not to impacted on their mental health. It's impossible. It's totally impossible. I don't know anybody that's strong enough to get to that point and it have not had an impact. And then you're faced with that courtroom arena that is terrorising you on that. So as much as the previous government, shall we say, says that they treat domestic abuse in the same category as terrorism, is laughable. But the real changes could be implemented if they wanted to. I just think we've all got to keep having as voices heard, and I think the only way that we can do that is in collaboration, as one big voice. I mean, I've said that, we need one service that is going to oversee and overlook all these failings, because ultimately the victims don't know where to go. First point of call is police, and more often than not they're being failed, aren't they? And that's the reason why we created the Lotus that's in our town centre in Barnsley, so that women know where to go. It's got a charity shop inside, it's got holistic treatments in there, as office spaces there. And that's where women can come and talk about their experiences and get that support. And the thing is, for us, it's soul destroying when we're trying to get them the safeguarding in place, but then they're being failed. And whether that be A&E, whether that be police, whether that be social care, there is no safeguarding. As much as they want to tick the boxes and say that there isn't. And that's soul destroying. That is soul destroying. Where you've got women that are coming in vulnerable situations that you want to help so much, and they're faced with what they're faced with after they've disclosed.
Yeah, I mean, we always focus on the police and the criminal justice system, and obviously that's a huge part of it. And just to go back to what you were saying, people do give up, and only 24% of incidents are ever reported to the police. So when the government say they want to halve, domestic abuse, etc., they're halving probably, or their aim is to halve the reported. But that's, only a quarter of the reality. It's a huge undertaking when you think about what is actually happening rather than what is being reported. But there are so many other agencies within the system that are also making it difficult for victims, like social services, etc., who blame women for what's happening at home. You need to protect these children. Then they don't give any real help to the woman in terms of leaving, and it's at the point of leaving where she really is at risk of being murdered, and there's no there's nothing, no realisation from them that actually they're now at more risk than they were when they were with the perpetrator, and they're left to fend for themselves. Then if, like you say, they end up with mental health issues, which most women will do after living with domestic abuse for a long time, then they're blamed for that. So, it's your fault that you've got these issues, and very often you end up seeing the woman who's been forced to leave the abusive relationship and criticised for failing to protect the children is dragged out into a situation which is more risky. So, the incidents perhaps get more serious, increase. More pressure is placed on her, mental health deteriorates, and the children end up back with the perpetrator at the end of it. How is that okay? And that happens all the time.
Yeah, and it is so transparent. It is so transparent to us what is actually happening. It's unreal. It is. It's exactly as you've just said. And the simple solution is lock him up. Remove him. Why are they removing her and the children? I don't get it at all. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's unbelievable that they end up having them in their care when they've done all this. And you can see it. It's there. I've sat in meetings where there's been 10 professionals around the table and not once seen it, and I can see straight through it. It's unbelievable, and it's only because I've lived it, obviously, that I can see that. But yeah, I think it's a case of where, women shouldn't be having to go into refuge. I don't agree with that at all. I think all these refuges, if we've got no spaces in prison, turn refuges into prisons and keep them locked up.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. Why should women and children be the ones that have to leave? And that's just the norm, isn't it? It's kind of what's expected, and the perpetrator gets to stay in the house. His life isn't disrupted at all.
Yeah, she's got no control of finances more often than not. And then she's faced with an housing crisis because there literally isn't anywhere for them to go, literally. So they find themselves soaked for surfing. They have to report to the local housing officer, declare themselves homeless. Then they want a proof of where they've been living. They want proof of bank statements, which sometimes they ain't got access to. So then, in those days where they're having the Marac meetings, what the hell do they think happens? Where do they go? And then they wonder why they go back.
Yeah, precisely. All the pressure and the expectations are always on the mum, on the female victim in those situations, and it's wrong.
So by the time she's faced that 12-month circle of going through all of this, from police to social care, by the time she's ended up in family court, right, and endured all of that, while he's carried on living his own life, controlling, in charge of all money and everything else, she's absolutely destroyed by this point. She ain't got capacity because her mental health's so bad. He's there, still working, still living his life, carrying on as normal. He still has PR. So because he's got parental responsibility, she ain't got mental capacity anymore. She ain't got anywhere right to live because there is nowhere. So what do? We'll have children to perp.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole system is wrong, isn't it? It needs turning on its head, really, and that's what I mean. It's not just the police. The police are kind of at the sharp end of it, and the ones that we generally focus on, because they're dealing with the life and death potential situations. But there are so many other parts of it that play into it all, that the whole system does need to be overhauled. And the way we view domestic abuse, even, why doesn't she just leave, all of that, we never ask anything about why does he keep doing that. We never get that. Nobody has ever asked me that question. The amount of times I've heard people ask me, when you tell them what you do, why do they not just leave? I've been asked that hundreds of times over the years, and that tells you everything about how people view domestic abuse.
Yeah. More often than not, she is normally left with nothing. Nothing. And it's the very thing that they've set out to do is to destroy them because that's what they've been told that they're going to do the entire time of that relationship. Ultimately, that is the goal. I will destroy you one way or another. And the system allows that.
Yeah. And also, it's actually increasing her risk. If she leaves, that's when she's most likely to be murdered.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
and I think subconsciously women know that. They are terrified. They're scared to leave.
Of course they are, because they've been told that if you leave me, I'll kill you. I'll have them children removed from you. I'll tell everybody what you've done. They might have taken videos of you. They might have, they are it's like there's no which way out of this. So they've bribed them, they've blackmailed them with the very thing that's most important, the very thing that they've got left, because the self-respect's been destroyed, the confidence has been destroyed. So what will they do? They'll threaten them with kids. And then it happens. Yeah.
And it's no surprise, is it, that a lot of women feel the only way out of that situation is suicide. It's not surprising, is it?
Not at all. Not at all. It's horrific. I became alcohol dependent and very nearly killed. He was going to kill me one way or another, whether that be me do it to myself or he was going to do it. And by the end of it all, I was in hospital and they didn't know whether I was going to... I asked them that question, am I going to die? And they basically said to me, we don't know. We don't know. We've got to wait and see how your liver if it starts recovering. Because I used alcohol as a coping mechanism. And it was there. It was being fed to me, basically. So I took, anything to numb it, anything to stop it.
He also knew that if you were dependent on alcohol and he was supplying that to you, you were far less likely to leave.
Exactly. Supplying, withholding. Yeah. And it's very, very cruel. Very, very cruel. Because once you're dependent on alcohol, it is the hardest substance to detox off. It's the only substance that you can die from, just from stopping. And the addiction side of it is the ultimate control, really, because your body cannot function without it. And ultimately it did very, very nearly destroy me and everything, really. And luckily the universe must have said, you're not going anywhere. And if somebody had told me, Rachel, 4 years ago I'd be doing what I do now, I'd have laughed at them. But I do believe everything happens for they did, and my consultant often tells me that, because I am extremely lucky to be here. I do pay the consequences of it all, because I have cirrhosis now, and the back end of trauma to my body and everything. I've got rheumatoid arthritis, I've got a load of ailments, but I am still here and I'm doing what I'm doing, and I won't stop until real changes are made, because I've been in that situation, and I would never want anybody to endure that, ever, ever. So yeah, we've all just got to keep doing what we're doing, and hopefully, eventually, that real changes are going to be made, and this system can be made better, because the things that could be put in place are quite simple, that would prevent a hell of a lot of these situations happening.
Even just, the biggest thing for me would be a change in attitude. And I know that sounds easy. Actually creating that change in culture that would be needed to change the attitude of, the police, social workers, whoever. But if you change the attitude, and really that doesn't require another police officer, does it? That's something that needs to happen inside all of those individuals. If that was to happen, then there would be a huge change.
Yeah, yeah.
But I suppose the bigger question is how do you change people's attitudes?
I think I think by speaking out and keep, having voices heard, the voices that have never been heard, because I don't think that general public actually realise, well, they won't, because unless you've experienced it, you can't even believe how bad it is. Um, I can go to my hospital for my routine appointments and stuff, and I'm asked, am I okay? Am I safe? And I once actually asked one of the nurses if I said no, and I actually went with my Resolute t-shirt on because I'd been to Lotus, and I was actually asked if I'm okay, am I safe? And I said to her, what would you do if I said no? She went, um, well, we'd put referrals in, and we'd make sure that safeguarding referrals were put in,
Social services crawling all over you, basically.
exactly, and that then puts the fear of God in anybody disclosing, and that shouldn't be the case. That should not be the case at all, and that's why the results that we tend to get a hell of a lot better if the system was better, because they are open with us. They know we're not going to lead. It's like leading lambs to slaughter, isn't it? You know, and it's like I go back to saying before, there is no safeguarding in place. It's absolute load of crap. It's like having an hot potato and throwing it round. Nobody wants to catch it. That is what we're trying to navigate. So it's all right putting alt referrals in. Nobody wants to do what about it because it's so complex. They don't know how to do it. They don't know how to deal with it.
Well, the only way they know how to deal with it is to blame the victim for not protecting the children. And I just think, well, how can you blame a victim who is also a victim, as well as the children? They're all victims in that situation. And the one person who's created that is not the mum generally, it's the perpetrator, it's the dad or the stepdad or whoever the perpetrator is in that family. That's the person that you need to be focusing on, and you need to be helping, the mum and the children to live a life of safety away from him, preferably without shipping them off into a refuge or whatever. If you put somebody into a refuge or a hostel, then you've made.
And let's remember, these places are not five-star hotels. They're not by any means.
But anyone would miss their home, wouldn't they? Even if you didn't miss the perpetrator.
And the pets as well. That's another massive thing that they're tied to. Yeah, if they've got animals that they love, some victims, that's the only thing they've got left.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, you're much more likely to find a situation where the woman does end up reconciling with the partner, whereas if you got the partner out of the house and her and the children can stay in her own surroundings with the pets, with all the children's toys.
And security in place. Get the security in place. I mean, we've had
and have the perpetrator tagged so he can't come near the property without
exactly. The bus needs to be marked straight away. Remove the perp and put the shame on him, because it is not a victim's shame to carry. It is not her shame to carry. Remove him and lock him up. That's it. So your refuge place, put him in that place instead, and keep her and her kids safe and supported. And then that would change eventually society's perception and views on it, because it would show that it's actually him that needs naming and shaming, not her and her children. That let's remember, these kids are schooled inside some of these refuges. They've lost their friends. They've lost any form of normality around them. They're not allowed to tell anybody where they've gone. I mean, can anybody, you cannot even imagine what these kids are living with.
Well, they've been through hell with, the experience with the perpetrator, and then they're put into a new kind of hell, aren't they? Where
Yeah.
they're missing their pets, their school friends,
Everything.
their teachers, their
Everything.
toys, all of that, the normality. Um, the only things they could get comfort from whilst living under siege with the perpetrator, all of that's ripped away. And I think,
Yeah.
we are perpetrating further abuse in how we deal with domestic abuse, whether it be through
A
the
thousand percent.
child protection procedures, the criminal justice system, the family courts, the housing, all of that. We kind of pile more misery on, don't we? So we need to have a system where that doesn't happen at all, and any inconvenience is placed on the perpetrator, not the victim.
1,000%. And I'm sure I'll get a lot of people trolling me or whatever. But do you know what? I really don't care because it is what needs to happen. It is what needs to be put in place. And like you said, I think we need to start being brave about this and actually saying what a lot won't say because they're scared to say it. Well, I'm not scared to say it, and the simple reason is because I've lived in that level of fear that I will never let anybody let me get to again. And it's as simple as that. And the reason I do it is because I do actually care. I care what's happening to these women. I care what's happening to their children. And there is no duty of care anywhere in this system anymore. Literally nobody gives a shit. And I do think if you've got tougher sentences, tougher consequences, crack down on it. Stop letting women have that shame on their shoulders when it's not their burden to carry. If we had better education, communication, and accountability, them three things, simple.
But the start to all of this, I think, is, in terms of how do we change this attitude. You can't change that overnight. So, in my view, people say fake it till you make it. Well, they're going to have to fake a different attitude, even if they don't believe it, because there needs to be consequences if they don't. So,
Yeah.
You can't change people's minds overnight, but they're going to have to start acting as though they have changed their minds. And if they don't, then they need to be out of those jobs. And I do think that, the only way to change people's behaviours a lot of the time is for there to be really harsh consequences for them if they don't change. And we can't do.
I think it's a bit like, right, if I was going to Asda or shop every week and I was taking a full weekly shop with no consequence behind it, I'm going to keep doing it, aren't I? I'm just going to keep taking that. I'm just going to keep going every day or every week and keep taking it. But I bet you it won't be long before, if that was reality, I would be arrested and sent to prison for it. And it's the same thing. They're breaching these orders with no consequence behind it. They know there's no consequence behind it, so they're just going to keep doing it.
And the behaviour gets worse, doesn't it? The first breach might be fairly minor because they're just testing the water.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when they realise they can get away with that, which is why I don't think it's helpful for the police or the CPS to say, well, that's a trivial breach. Really? Trivial to who? She's terrified about that, and she knows that that's just the beginning. So, we do need to be, I think, have really robust penalties for even tiny breaches, because it will get worse and worse. And they play the system and they'll try out a minor breach, see what happens for that. And if nothing happens with that, then it'll be worse and worse and worse.
Yeah. And how much... But the thing is, like you said, it gets worse and worse and worse. How much money and resources are wasted on that?
Yeah, 77 billion every year.
Exactly. Put the tag in place, get the app in place. With technology that we've got in 2024, you're telling me that things can't be put in place. It's okay for perpetrators to tag victims and stalk them and monitor them, but yet it's a perpetrator's human right not to be tagged. What?
Well, I think, that's used as an argument. I'm not sure in reality it would hold up, but people say that all the time, don't they? And I think we need to be braver about this. And, there are two humans here, and one of them is likely to end up dead if we don't get it right. So I
Yeah.
think when we're looking at the balance of rights, that, when we're looking at the consequence being homicide for one person and inconvenience perhaps at best for the other,
Yeah.
and I actually don't think it does inconvenience them, but really there's no question, is there, about whose rights should come to the fore.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And I hope that some members of this new government are watching this, and I hope that Jess Phillips could watch this, um, because ultimately I think she's fantastic, and I think if anybody is going to be able to get any form of change done, it's going to be her.
Well, she knows, she's got good experience. She knows the reality. I don't think you need to convince her that things need to change, but she's one woman in, a government with a huge majority with lots of things that they want to do. And I think, you know, it's about priorities, isn't it? And this is the test. It's okay saying we are going to, reduce domestic abuse, but they have to realise and they have to listen to Jess Phillips, I think, and take it seriously,
Yeah,
that if they're serious about this, they need to radically overhaul what we've been doing, because all that's been happening is, more money has been going into the system over the last 20 years. It has. Domestic abuse is talked about more. It is seen as, something that's bad, whereas even 30 years ago it wasn't really seen as seriously as it is now. But the rate of domestic violence and the rate of domestic homicide is not decreasing, it's going up. So
yeah,
that tells me that you can't just keep putting money into the same system. It needs to be completely overhauled. And
yeah,
it's a great opportunity for the government to do something really radical, and I really
yeah.
hope that they do.
I do as well. I really do, and I think that she is one woman, but then if she is listening, then she needs to know that there's also another team of women that is 100% behind her. We are collaborating and we are getting us voices heard and we are on the front line. And if we are listened to, we can support her as well, because this is the time now. Enough's enough. It's ridiculous what is happening. Um, when a lot can be prevented, and we've got a national emergency. So now's the time where we could be getting those real changes made.
For COVID, I mean, the action that was taken not just by the government in this country but across the world. I mean, if somebody had
Yeah,
said to you 10 years ago, can you imagine a situation where you won't be allowed to
you
leave
built.
the house other than
I
for an
know.
hour, all of those things, you
Yeah,
would have just laughed and said
of course you
absolutely
would
not.
have.
And,
Yeah,
it just shows that actually you can change things, you can completely turn things on their head,
yeah,
and, people will support the government if they believe that it's being done for the right reasons. So I just think we
yeah,
need to be brave and we need to do things that haven't been done before if we want to
yeah.
see real change.
But it's only like when we had to wear seatbelts. It's only like when we had to stop smoking in public. You're gonna get, but this is an issue where you're only gonna get a small majority that would be in disagreement, surely, because I think, Well, I know that the majority would be welcoming these big changes, like the tag and app system. Victims would be crying out with relief if that were in place. That sense of safety that they would feel from that, and knowing that he's not allowed to come near her, you know, take his mobile phone off him. Why he don't need to contact her. Make sure there's a blockage somewhere within connection where he cannot contact whatsoever. You know, do you know what, Rachel? I've absolutely loved talking to you, and we've been talking now for over an hour.
I know, time flies, doesn't it?
I know, I could talk to you forever.
Well, you're doing some
there's
great
so much to
work.
discuss. Yeah, you too. We've just got to keep going, haven't we?